this morning with Darren Hughes asking the question, surely we are paying more and getting less. We are paying more and getting less. And I wonder why we're paying more. That surely is the question. Why are we paying more? Well, Mr. Chair, I don't know how closely Darren Hughes has listened to this debate, because it's pretty obvious that Lynn Pillay hasn't listened to this debate, because Lynn Pillay criticises the Maori Party for supporting this bill. And the Maori Party made it very clear that they weren't supporting the second reading. In fact, the Maori Party voted against the second reading and wouldn't be voting for this bill. So Lynn Pillay hasn't been listening to this debate. And let's now address the issue that Darren Hughes asks. He says, we're paying more and getting less. Well, why are we paying more? Well, we had claims in 2005 totalling $2.2 billion. $2.2 billion. In the space of 4 years, Mr. Chair, the claims paid by ACC have gone from $2.2 billion to $3.6 billion. A 57% increase. A 57% increase over 4 years. Mr. Speaker, that is simply not sustainable. Mr. Chair, Darren Hughes may think that money comes from fresh air, but if you keep increasing your claims at 12% per annum, 12% per annum indefinitely, of course you'll pay more. Of course you'll pay more. Someone has got to pay. Lynn Pillay says ACC is not broken. She says that certainly levies do not need to rise. And Mr. Chair, yes, maybe we may get to a state where levies won't rise, but we certainly will not get to that state where levies don't rise if we keep paying increases in claims of increasing by 12% per annum. Look, Mr. Chair, I believe that one of the major contributions to this debate was made by Marianne Street when she said during the second reading that medical science has advanced so much since ACC was passed or brought into being in the early 1970s that people who would routinely have died as a result of accidents now live on. And that is one of the major reasons, sir, that we have a blowout in ACC. It's not the only reason, but it's a contributing reason, because people who would have died now live on, but they live on as paraplegics, they live on as tetraplegics. And the cost of keeping those people alive, Mr. Chair, can run into many hundreds of thousands of dollars, can run into many millions of dollars. And Mr. Chair, well, I'll listen to you, Mr. Robinson. What I'm suggesting, Mr. Chair, should happen to those people is, yes, they should be allowed to live on, absolutely, and that's right. And it has to be paid for. It has to be paid for, Ruth. Ruth Dyson. My sister was involved in a fatal car accident 30 years ago, and she lived for 53 hours. And one of the hardest decisions that my mother had to make was to allow her life support system to be turned off. Now, she would not have had the quality of life that she could have had with medical science today, but if with the advances in medical science, had that accident that she'd had 30 years ago happened today, she may have been able to live on, and my mother would have wanted her to live on. And the wonderful thing about ACC is that the advances in medical science would enable her to live on, but it comes at a cost, and it comes at a very significant cost. And we need to address that issue. We need to address that issue because we have living today, Mr. Chair, people who are tetraplegics, who are paraplegics, and the cost of them living on is many millions of dollars. And life is precious. Life is absolutely precious, and if those people can live on with any semblance of a normal life, we absolutely need to allow that to happen, and that is one of the beauties of medical science. But, Mr. Chair, we need to recognise that that has a huge impact on claims of ACC, and that is one of the contributing reasons why we have calculated liabilities of ACC of some $23 billion, because a person has a fatal accident. Let's say in 1995, 15 years ago, they have a fatal accident, they become a tetraplegic, they can live on, but they require around-the-clock care, 24 hours a day. Mr. Chair.
Call John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what you have, Mr Chair, is there is a cost. And an actuary can actually calculate for a person to live on from, say, the age of 25 for a further 40 years, it may come to $2, $3, $4, $5 million. And you do that actuarial calculation, and you do that for all other claimants, sir, and you come, I think the current valuation on ACC liabilities is some $23 billion. Now, what is Lynn Pillai's contribution to the debate? She says, well, because we've got assets of $11 billion, ACC is not broke. Well, Mr Chair, as if the actuarial cost, if the forecast cost of looking after, maintaining the life support systems, keeping those people alive, supporting them, giving them income is some $23 billion, ACC is currently running at a liability or a deficit of $12 billion. And so there is a cost. I find it very interesting that when it comes to superannuation, the Labour Party criticised the National Party's decision not to continue pre-funding New Zealand superannuation. We have a New Zealand superannuation fund of some $12 billion. I don't hear the Labour Party saying because we've got $12 billion in reserve in the super fund, we don't have to contribute. No. Well, in the case of ACC, it's exactly the same. We have assets of $11 billion, we have liabilities of $23 billion, and there's a $12 billion deficit. And we need to wake up to the fact, Mr Chair, that over the last 30 years, or 40 years, going on 40 years since ACC was adopted, there have been advances in medical science. That is fantastic. It is fantastic that there have been advances in medical science, so young people like my sister, who wasn't able to live 30 years ago, can live today, and live today with and their families can have them around. But there has to be a cost, and we need to recognise, Mr Chair, that there have been substantial extensions to ACC. The country clearly can't afford it. You can't carry on indefinitely increasing claims by 12% per annum, 12% per annum, year after year after year. And what this government is trying to do, sir, is it's trying to put a lid on that, trying to recognise the fact that claims have blown out. And what do? We introduce competition, we introduce choice, we look at ways that we can reduce injuries occurring, improve rehabilitation rates. Mr Chair, this is not a simple issue. It is not a simple issue, but the government is waking up to the reality. The government has woken up to the reality that you cannot keep increasing claimants by 12% per annum, 5 times the rate of inflation, year after year. Thank you, Mr Chair.
I call Miriam.